Morning, YouTube. Well, today is 7:04 in the morning. I'm gonna show you how to buy a boat in the wintertime. It's about 32 degrees out. I'm gonna go head down here to South Annapolis Yacht Center in Annapolis, Maryland, and we are going to survey a Sea Ray 46 460 Sundancer. Should be an interesting day. I'll get some water temperatures and review with you, hey, how this process works and how we get through it in the wintertime. Today's going to be an interesting day because my buyer is not going to be here today. So I'm going to focus on doing a video for him. Hi, Joe. Just to basically show the process, but also inform my buyer on how things are going. And this is going to determine whether he's going to purchase the boat or not. So looking at our temperature, it looks like it's about 40 degrees. That's cold.
Of course, it got a little colder as the day went on. Walking up to the boat, really nice marina. One of the things that we did notice is we noticed some oil in the water. We will be determining where that's coming from. I'm going to walk down the starboard side. Nice clean boat. Just doing a pan around the cockpit and the helm. Nice big expansive cockpit. Down there we've got Tom Hug. He's the engine surveyor. We're going to talk a little bit more about him later. And he's got his battery checkers and going through everything. Just walking down, just showing you guys the boat. Walking into the salon, up to the V-berth. One of the things we're checking is whether the heat works or not. Water's so cold, but these are electric heaters. I'm going to explain that in a bit. Nice hardwood floors. Nice seating area back here in the back. 2001 Sea Ray 460.
Just a quick notation as we check the water temperature being around 40 degrees. We've got the air conditioner set on heat at 76 degrees. These are electric heaters, which is very important. Doesn't use all the water to heat the boat through a condenser. And it is starting to get a little warm in here. We're going to test that here shortly. So generally air conditioners don't like to work under 44 degrees, I think is the reference, and we're looking at heating it 51 degrees. We'll check it here. Just turned it on about 10 minutes ago. Coming up to the switch panel, this gentleman does plan on taking the boat down to Florida, so we're going to make sure everything's working okay for him. Obviously with the cold weather, heat is most important for him. But again, on the 240 volt system, we're looking at the air conditioning system here. It's how we turn everything on. We got to make sure we turn our pump on, air conditioner and salon air conditioner. So there's two air conditioners on this boat.
So Tom's down there taking a peek at everything. He's going to give us a really good rundown. It's about 13 minutes long. Just want to prep you. We're just looking at all the systems up on the helm. We did notice the autopilot is not functioning. We noticed it also disconnected in the back as well. Switches are well labeled, well laid out. They're not all sun bleached out. Again, there's the autopilot. And as Tarn Kensley, he's the marine surveyor. He's checking all the buttons, all the switches. He's looking down all the hatches, basically thoroughly going through the boat itself. Surveyor's job is to find findings and report back. We were just noticing the cycling of the head system and making sure that it was turning off properly. It did work properly.
This is the port propulsion unit. It has one drive belt, which is a serpentine style drive belt. It is aftermarket belt someone has installed. My question is, it doesn't appear that the belt is the proper length because the belt tensioner is very close to the alternator where they're normally separated by a pretty good distance. And I also have a little bit of belt debris. So something may be going on with that belt. It could be the wrong belt on it. They would recommend to remove the belt guard and do some further inspection. The freshwater hoses, raw water hose on the engine, still original, still pliable. Some minor surface corrosion on some of the hose clamps that I would replace at some point. The engine oil lines, there's no indication of cracking, chafing. There's some minor corrosion on a couple of the hose line fittings. I do question if the oil lines to and from the remote oil filter are Coast Guard approved, and they have been replaced at some point. The fuel lines to and from the engine, they're original Coast Guard approved, like A1 J1527 with brass style fittings. No cracking, no chafing, no corrosion on the fittings. Once it gets to the engine, it has the original aero equipped FC234 hoses with no indication of cracking or chafing, but there is some corrosion on some of the steel fittings that need to be cleaned, primed, and painted. The transmission oil lines are original. They are aero equipped FC234. No cracking, no chafing, but again, we do have some minor corrosion on some of the steel fittings. We want to clean, prime, and paint. The turbocharged air hoses are original. No indication of oil seepage through the hoses, but there is some minor corrosion on some of the hose clamps, which would be recommended to replace. The wiring on the engine. The terminal ends are all clean, tight, and mostly secure. The alternator and starter do have protective covers. I haven't started the engines yet, but there's no indication of exhaust water leaks. The exhaust hoses, most clamps, fiberglass pipings properly secured. There is some minor surface corrosion on some of the 6-inch exhaust hose clamps. And there is a hose clamp that's supposed to be around the exhaust piping that secures it to its support bracket, and that just slid down, so we want to re-secure that so the fiberglass piping is not jumping around. There is a number of minor oil seepages. I kind of wipe my finger, see some oil. Nothing's actually dripping oil out, but minor oil seepages. One is the seawater pump mounting gasket is seeping. I would recommend to retorque the bolts, wash it off, monitor it. If the seep comes back, go ahead and replace the gasket. The engine oil pressure sender, where it screws inside the cylinder block, is seeping. I recommend to remove the sender, reseal the threads, and reinstall it. The crankcase breather hoses, which connect the valve cover to the air sep assembly, they're leaking at the hose connection, so we want to go ahead and retorque the hose clamps. The air sep also has an oil drain hose that runs to the side of the oil pan for a drain. The fitting that screws in the side of the oil pan is seeping, so at next oil change we want to pull out that fitting, replace the O-ring, put it back in. Same as the oil drain line that goes in the bottom of the oil pan, that fitting is seeping as well. Next time you drain the oil out, take the fitting out, replace the O-ring, and reinstall it. The turbocharger has oil drain hoses to allow the oil to drain back in from the turbocharger down to the side of the engine. And the two hoses are seeping some oil through the hoses themselves. So at some point we want to replace the hoses and clamps. Nothing severe. I just noticed that when I run my hand over the hoses, they feel a little oily. Also, the air sep has an oil drain hose connection at the air sep canister. That connection is seeping a little bit of oil. So probably no more than retorquing the hose clamp. I also noticed some minor oil seepage at the engine oil cooler gaskets. So at some point we need to replace those oil cooler gaskets. It's also noted that at some point the oil cooler housing has been replaced for whatever reason. Also, on the oil cooler there's a bypass valve, a plug, that's seeping a little bit of oil. Same thing, we want to pull that plug out and replace a copper washer on that. There's also some minor seepage on the remote oil filter line adapter. On the outboard side of the engine there's an adapter so you can run two remote oil filter lines, and those fittings are seeping. At some point we want to pull those fittings out, replace the O-rings, and reinstall it. And probably the most costly seep on it, at some point it appears that the rear engine oil seal is leaking. There's indications on the side of the flywheel housing bolts that there's oil coming out of the bolts, plus underneath where the transmission and flywheel meet, there's a lot of oil. So I'm assuming it's probably the rear engine oil seal, unless there's been a major oil leak in the back of the engine which is ran into. Not likely, because the other engine, when I get to it, it seems like that rear engine oil seal is leaking as well. And that's all I really have for the oil seepages. On the coolant system, we pressure tested. There was no leaks anywhere. The coolant protection mine is 30, which is 50%, and the heat exchanger cap is 15 pounds. Unfortunately, we tested the SCA levels, which are the inhibitors in the coolant system, and there are non-Cummins antifreeze coolant in it. So we need to drain it, flush it, replace the thermostat, and reinstall the Cummins ES coolant. The C valve is operational and bonded. The C string is clean and bonded. The raw water intake hoses are serviceable, double clamp, no crack in the hoses or corrosion on the clamps. The rate cores are clean, proper 30 micron. One settlement bowl, the outboard rate core indicates some minor contamination, nothing severe, so at some point we want to take it apart and clean it. The dripless shaft seal assembly, the silicone hose is serviceable, but there's minor corrosion on the double stainless steel clamps, and at some point we want to replace those hose clamps. There's some minor cracking of the engine oil pressure and coolant rubber gauge panel in the engine room, nothing severe. We do want to service the air sep element or air filter more or less. There's also some seepage at the rate core drain plugs and adapters, so we need to drain out the rate cores, reseal the plugs and the adapters. One of the air sep filter element springs that keep the filter on is the wrong style spring. So it uses three, two are right and one is wrong, so it would be nice to put the proper protective spring on it. We do want to make sure the transmission can service properly, which includes a fluid change and removing and cleaning the suction screen, which doesn't appear to be in and out at any time recent. The zincs are serviceable, which are three of them. Unfortunately, they did use some sort of a silicone on the threads, which would affect the bonding process. So we want to pull those zincs out and clean off those threads and reinstall them properly. The engine isolators, which separates the vibration from the engine to the stringer, all seem to be sitting all nice and high, properly secured, and on C-Trial we'll do a back down test to make sure there's no rubber damage. The battery is clean, tight, properly secured, load tested okay. In service date is 6/23, including electric light levels are full. Noted that the cap for the coolant recovery bottle is cracked. It's working, but it's just cracked, so we need to replace at some point. Couple of things, it looks like at some point that the seawater pump has been replaced, but it needs to be painted. The starter and alternator have been replaced at some point. The starter pony solenoid has been replaced, and as I alluded to before, the engine oil cooler housing appears to have been replaced, along with the engine oil supply line. Looks like it's been replaced as well. A couple bells and whistles. It does have a coolant recovery system, a engine and transmission oil changer system, which is operational. Stainless steel exhaust riser with no indication of corrosion at the weld areas or on the assembly. A hand-operated fuel primer, which is operational. A closed crankcase recovery system, Walker air sep system. It does have a tied strip of shaft seal assembly with one spare seal. It also utilizes a rate core duplex assembly with a vacuum gauge and a single lever for changing from filter to filter. And it also has an engine room oil and coolant temperature gauges, which I'll verify on C-Trial. Utilize my test gauges, make sure they're accurate. And that's all I really have for the port engine. Good. The starboard engine pretty much mimics the other one with the belt condition, and again I question that belt, which it may be the wrong length, and it is an aftermarket belt. The hoses and clamps still original, still pliable, minor surface corrosion on the clamps. The engine oil lines, they're original. They're just using a steel braided style line and silicone style oil drain hoses. No indication of cracking, chafing, nor corrosion. The fuel lines to and from the engine, again, original Coast Guard approved like A1J1527 with brass style fittings. No cracking, no chafing, no corrosion on the fittings. On the engine, they're utilizing the Aero-equipped FC234 fuel lines, so no indication of cracking or chafing, but there is some corrosion on some of the steel fittings that need to be cleaned, primed, and painted. The transmission oil lines are original, Aero-equipped FC234, no cracking, no chafing, but again we have some minor corrosion on some of the steel fittings we want to prime and paint. On the turbocharger air hoses, there's a total of 4 hoses. 3 of the hoses are serviceable. One hose, because of the turbocharger compressor housing and turbocharger piping are misaligned, looks like at some point it could split and leak air. So we want to realign that turbocharger compressor to line up that hose and replace the hose at some point. The hose clamps do indicate some corrosion and probably want to be replacing all the hose clamps. The wiring, the clean, tight, properly secured. The alternator starter do have protective covers on it. No indication of exhaust or water leaks. The exhaust hoses, clamps, and fiberglass piping are all serviceable. I did notice some minor corrosion on some of the 6-inch exhaust hose clamps. At some point we do want to replace, but they are all double clamped. On oil seepages, the oil line fitting to the engine room oil pressure gauge is seeping at the fittings, so we want to reseal the fittings. The oil drain fitting in the bottom of the oil pan, similar to the other engine, is seeping oil out the fitting. So again, at some point, when you drain the oil, pull the fitting out, replace the O-ring. The air sip oil drain hose line fitting into the oil pan just as the other engine is seeping some oil, same thing. Next time you drain it, pull the fitting out, replace the O-ring. And it also looks like the rear engine oil seal is leaking because there's a copious amount of oil between the transmission and flywheel housing, and notice some oil coming from the flywheel housing holes. Pressure tested the antifreeze, no leaks anywhere. Coolant protection minus 30 to 50% concentration, and the heat exchanger caps okay at 15 pounds. Unfortunately, they are not using the Cummins ES coolant, which we need to drain, flush, replace the thermostat, and install the proper coolant. There's some minor green corrosion on the C valve, C strainer assembly, and there seems to be some excessive corrosion on the heat exchanger assembly itself, including the aftercooler assembly itself. It would be noted to find out last time they were actually serviced. It does look like at some point at the aftercoolers have been serviced, but I question the quality which it was done. It seems like they used some sort of a high-tack material at the seal areas, which you're not supposed to be using with a rubber seal. The C valve's operational and bonded. The C strainer is bonded and clean. Unfortunately, the drain plug that's in the bottom of the C strainer is broken off, which is no more than a plastic plug. You can just draw out and replace it. The raw water intake hoses are serviceable, double clamp, no corrosion on the clamps, and no crack on the hose. The dripless shaft seal assembly hose is serviceable, minor corrosion on the clamps. The rake cores are clean, proper 30 micron, but again, minor contamination of one inboard settlement bowl that we want to clean out at some point. The battery is clean, tight, properly secured, load tested okay. In service date is 6/23. Zincs, again, same as the other one, they use some sort of a silicone product on the threads. We want to remove those zincs and clean it off and reinstall them. And all three zincs are serviceable. The engine isolators are all serviceable, sit nice and high, and again, we'll do a back down test. We do want to replace the throttle cable to the engine. The throttle cable guide has disconnected off the cable itself, which may or may not interfere with the full stroke of the cable, but we do want to replace that. We do want to service the transmission properly, which includes cleaning the suction screen. There is a slight fuel seepage at the fittings at the fuel cooler assembly. That's going to be no more than a matter of removing the fittings, resealing it, and put it back together. Also, the rake core drain plugs and the adapters are seeping just as the other side. Clean some of the minor corrosion from the engine transmission, wire brush, wire wheel, and paint. And that's about all I have for that. For the bells and whistles, it looks like the seawater pump has been recently replaced. We do want to replace that or paint that so it doesn't turn green. The alternator and starter have been replaced, and the bells and whistles such as the coolant recovery system, stainless steel riser with no corrosion, engine transmission oil changer, dripper shaft seal assembly with one spare seal, duplex rake core assembly, and the engine room oil and coolant gauges. And that's all I have so far.
What we're going to take a look at right now is a bladder system that was installed. This is a easier fix than installing a whole fuel tank, but they replaced it with a bladder. More on this a little bit later. It's a big finding, and we're going to get it checked out. Here we are. We're taking the boat out down Spa Creek, and there's the Eastport Bridge. Just kind of landmarks. Captain Kate is driving the boat. And we're just putting down the 6 mile an hour zone, heading to the haul out. Haul out's where we're going to check the bottom of the boat, get it power washed, make sure the boat's clean, make sure everything's ready to go for survey. We want to make sure the bottom's clean because if we have a foul bottom, we won't hit the numbers we need. Yeah, I'm just noticing it's a tight spot and it's a little breezy to get into this spot.
Strong wind. It's going to be a little tough to get in here. We're going to back into the slip, back into the lift well. Should be interesting.
So this is showing how we got in, and not a lot of room, but I had to put the camera down. I took over the helm and got us into the slip. Got to be a nervous broker. So here we are, just giving you a little pan around the marina. It's Annapolis Harbor Yacht Yard.
Yeah, this was fun. not much room for error, but I backed her
Yeah, there
in.
wasn't a lot of room for error, so backed it right in. Didn't want to hit that ocean sitting there, but we got it in. Kind of panning around. We're getting the boat out of the water. Travel lift's doing its job. We're going to back it up, get it power washed, and we're going to start doing the hull check on the boat. It's going to involve the harmonic hammer, but just taking a look at the boat. This is where we can see if there's any blemishes. We did notice a couple paint blisters on the boat. That's just from poor sanding, and there's just one or two of those. But we always do want to look at blisters. I do mention that in the video. But all in all, looking around, everything looks really clean. This boat did come down from up north, just up in Baltimore, a few miles away to where the slip is for the survey. So just looking down the bottom of the boat, taking a look at the paint. We're going to take a look at the shafts, look at the rudders. There's the exhaust system for the Sea Ray. And just taking a look at the props. It had some barnacle growth on the trim tabs. And the guys are getting ready to fire the power washers up and take a look. Get everything cleaned up. Yep, zinc looks in good shape.
So part of the survey process is we are going through a survey haul. We just did a walk around the boat. Surveyor is going to take a harmonic hammer and a moisture meter, go around the boat, make sure there's no moisture delamination, basically making sure the structure of the hull is intact. Now we're doing what's called the survey symphony. What you're listening for is the crack in the hammer. Crack in the hammer is a good sign. The thud in the hammer is a bad sign.
Just to elaborate a little bit more on that. Yep, these crack, crack, crack. Everything's looking good. All checking for moisture, delamination, hull voids. Okay, when the hull comes out of a mold, basically it'll show itself. And it's interesting to hear the different sounds. Here, those were the couple paint blisters that we found. Starboard side on the rear inner chine. Yeah, the guys are just making sure get all the barnacles cleaned off.
One of the things when this boat was built, which was number 504, is determining whether it's a balsa boat or a Vinicel foam boat. That will determine how much moisture gets into the boat. Also, balsa wood as opposed to foam. Balsa wood tends to hold more water.
And just a notation on that, when I'm walking around and I'm describing things, guys, this is balsa wood has a better chance of holding moisture than a foam cord boat, and that is basically the coring that is underneath the junket.
One thing about paint blisters, they've never sunk a boat, but it's something you want to monitor. Grind them out, fill them, get them repaired properly.
So one quick notation on the moisture meter, just because it beeps doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. Moisture meter goes from 0 to 999. It beeps when it's anything over 100, 200. You can see it's gleaming right there. So it's very low moisture content. All boats are in the water, they hold moisture. So what he's doing is checking. So a boat will get moisture because, you know, those trim tabs are attached by screws. Anything that has penetration in the hull may have a failure rate with the caulk. Now we're going to take a look at the cutlass bearing.
So what he's doing right there is checking the cutlass bearing, make sure it's in good shape. Cutlass bearing is the bearing inside of the strut. Strut is what attaches to the shaft and the propeller.
Tarn had a really cool little tool here. This is a checking the tune of the props. Okay, so this puts this tool on there to identify if there's any anomalies in the props and in the shafts as well. See if we have a bent shaft.
Great check right there, making sure the shafts are true. And there's nothing oblong, bent. Bent shafts are an issue.
That's pretty close on that tip.
Yep.
We're pretty distant on that one.
Yep.
And that's actually touching.
Props out of tune.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've had buyers ask me, why do the props need to be in tune? Well, the props have everything to do with everything upline, okay? That's engine vibration. That can cause havoc. So here we are back at the bladder. I'm going to have John at the marina give us a little explanation, what his thoughts are, if he's ever used a bladder before. It's just a very unique fix, but we get why they did it, because, you know, replacing. In terms of the fuel moving, the bladder is going to collapse on itself.
Should. Usually what they do is take the vent out of the system and allow the bladder to collapse down on top to limit the amount of movement. You do it on the big boats when you're doing long transits and you put a bladder in the cockpit and it doesn't, I don't think it's ever experienced it for you, but
I mean, I've done the transit bladder, but what I was saying is that I've done it on racing sailboats where they want the ability to go full dry tank.
yeah.
And so you can only really accomplish that with a bladder.
Yeah, and so when we did it on the big boat with the bladder, fuel didn't move around. It was strapped down. The bladder was, and so there wasn't a whole lot of movement. But on long transits, it's easy. Doing it as a permanent solution, I get it in that boat because to fully replace a fuel tank is a nightmare, and it's a relatively, in the grand scheme of things, cost-effective format to do this. And
So here we are, we're back on the boat. We're going to pull out of the slip and we're going to go for a sea trial. Boat started right up. Pulling out of Annapolis Harbor. While we were up in the slings, the engine surveyor, Tom Hug, basically goes and he hooks up all of his gear to check all the pressures. So taking a look down, we do have the generator running and both main motors running. You see a lot of tubes hooked up here. These are basically all the checking out for blow-by and crankcase pressure, etc. So here we are, we're going to run the boat up to 2300 RPMs and we're going to hold that so Tom can do all of his checks. Engine temperatures remained at about 160 up from the gauges. And we're just slowly bringing the boat up. Taking a look at the gauges. We did check out the sync on the boat. The sync was working correctly. That will basically sync the engines to the same RPMs. When you hit it, it was operational. And basically the guys are down there just taking a peek at the motors. They're seeing about vibration. They're seeing if there's any leaks. They're checking through everything. Making sure, just using the flashlight. Here's Tom taking a look at all the everything moving.
Everything's running okay.
All in all, this boat ran fantastic. No engine vibration, everything excellent checkout. So I talked to my buyer about the bladder, and we were looking at the fuel gauges just to see if there was any. He was worried about movement, and basically the bladder, as John was explaining, collapses on itself. And here we are, we're going through, he's checking temperatures at the engines. A couple different spots that he does that. He's making the notations as to temperatures in particular areas, so he can give a rundown to the buyer. Here we are, we're doing a back down test. Basically what we're doing is checking all the stresses of the motor on the motor mounts, etc.
What we call back down test.
Idle to neutral. Hold on. Port engine
Just going to put it forward and reverse on port and starboard motor. Just going to throttle up, and they're going to look, see if there's any movement.
Forward.
Everything was fantastic. Nothing alarming.
Neutral.
The only thing we had a small concern about was that bladder. That's what you find on over 25-year-old boats.
Right, idle. Neutral. Forward. Right, good. Right, neutral. Right, starboard motor. Starboard motor.
Can I get in a left?
So here we are, we're back at the dock. We're finishing up the survey. This is one of the last things. He's going to check all the top sides. Running around with harmonic hammer again, and he's going to make notations if there's any elevated moisture. Did find a couple of the hatches had some elevated moisture. Basically, they need to be rebedded. And we're just listening. Listening for the sound of the hammer.
Sound of a void.
He said there may be a little void there, as you heard that little difference in the hammer sound.
Recommendation to rebed the hatch.
Checking down the port side, we did find some moisture that was down here. Speaking to my buyer, Joe. Sounds good. Here we are, starboard side, checking the deck. Sounds great. Ladies and gentlemen, just as an advance note, just want to let you know, just when it comes to older sea rays, this is probably one of the first checks that you want to do. We did find a little bit of moisture penetration. Again,
Anchor's working at the foot pedals.
very important safety feature, checking the anchor. Looking at the hardtop. Just check in, see if there's any moisture intrusion. So this boat does have updated electronics. The radar is outdated.
So, oil
Here are
samples.
the oil samples.
Send out to the lab. Port engine. Port transmission. Starboard transmission. One of the reasons why you get oil samples is you want to see what the color looks like. If you can see the difference in the color between those two transmission oils, and probably some contamination in there from the oil change system. So taking a look, what they did was they replaced the fuel tank with a bladder tank.
And my buyer did his research. This is Coast Guard approved. It's fine. Very creative solution. And my buyer asked me to get another look. We had him on the phone. Just a good video of that. And then just kind of panning around the engine room. Looking for leaks. Yeah, we found a little bit of that oil back there in the back that has since been cleaned up. I did get a picture of that. So here we are. Here we are at the end. Just a picture of me. This is Will Tate, Yacht Boss. We just went through a survey on a 2001 Sea Ray 460. It's an older boat, ladies and gentlemen, so there's going to be findings. You got to prepare yourself for that. You just try to find the best one that you can. The important thing is the expensive portion of these boats are the motors. Motors ran great. They do need some maintenance items. And again, surveyors hired to find any and all recommendations to bring the motors back to a zero-sum game. Felt this boat did very, very well. Handling performance. Didn't have as many issues as I've seen in older Sea Rays. Again, this is Will Tate, Yacht Boss. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Push out more content. I'm looking forward to your comments. Please feel free to comment if you have any questions. Have a great day.